Starting off at number 10, we have the Perron family. In January of 1971, the Perron family moved into a farmhouse in Rhode Island, where Carolyn, Roger, and their 5 daughters began to notice strange things happening. Carolyn would find things had been moved around, scratched, and broken with no explanation. Later on, beds would rise off the floor and objects would be tossed around the rooms. At one point, a seance was conducted, during which Carolyn Perron became momentarily possessed and spoke in tongues, while her chair rose from the ground and her body was flung across the room. Strangely, the family continued to live in the house until they were able to move in 1980. All right, up next, we have the case of Dr. Richard Gallagher and Julia. In 2008, a board-certified psychiatrist, Richard Gallagher, declared that his patient, known only as Julia, had experienced a case of possession. Julia claimed to be the queen of a satanic cult and was convinced she was being attacked by a demon. Gallagher met with her and ruled out mental illness when he observed Julia enter trance-like states, items flying off the shelves in his office, Julia speaking in tongues, and blurting out private details about his life that she couldn't possibly have known. Julia was eventually exorcised, allegedly spewing threats, levitating, exhibiting super strength, and influencing the temperature of the room. All right, our next case is that of Anna Eklund. Anna Eklund's possession spanned several decades, beginning in 1912 when she was just 14 years old. Anna's demonic possession was reportedly the result of a curse put on the devout Catholic in 1908 by her father and her aunt Mina. The first exorcism performed on Eklund in 1912 was successful for a time, but Eklund would be possessed again by even more demons in 1928. Her second exorcism, which lasted 3 sessions, was held at a convent and was so grueling it resulted in the deterioration of Anna's body. The demons were eventually exorcised and Anna went on to live her life, get this, with only milder possessions after. All right, up at number 7, we have the case of Clara Germana Seely. Clara Germana Seely, a 16-year-old student, was allegedly possessed in the late summer of 1906 after making a pact with the devil. Clara's behavior began to become erratic and intensified, with witnesses claiming that she developed a strong aversion to holy objects, tore at her clothes, talked to things that weren't visible, and growled like an animal. She also gained knowledge of other languages, levitated up to 5 feet off the ground, exhibited superhuman strength, and relayed personal information about others that she shouldn't have been able to know. 2 priests performed an exorcism that lasted 2 days before she was freed of the demon. All right, up next we have the strange case of Michael Taylor. After Michael's wife accused him of cheating on her and described his behavior as increasingly erratic and socially distant, Michael lashed out violently at both his wife and his alleged mistress. His terrifying behavior increased in frequency and intensity, and it was decided that Michael would be seen by priests. Following a full night of exhaustive exorcism sessions, the priests claimed they had pulled upwards of 40 demons from Taylor, but that several still remained inside him and they just sent him home. Well, upon his return, he violently ended the life of his wife and the family poodle. He was eventually picked up by police after wandering the neighborhood streets for hours, soaked in their blood. All right, and at the halfway point in this video, we have David Berkowitz, or the Son of Sam. You may have heard of him. One of America's most notorious serial slayers, claimed to have been possessed during his spree, blaming a demon named Papa Sam for his slaying of 6 New York City residents. After his capture, it was revealed that Papa Sam was his neighbor's dog, which he claimed was possessed by a 6,000-year-old demon who had a thirst for the spilling of human blood. Berkowitz claimed that the spirit locked him in an attic until he agreed to shed blood on its behalf. Super creepy. All right, up next we have the case of Roland Doe. After the passing of his aunt, Roland Doe, a 14-year-old boy, turned to a spirit board in an attempt to communicate with her. But apparently he invited in something much more sinister that possessed him. His family soon became overwhelmed by weird occurrences, including odd noises, furniture moving by itself, and objects levitating when Roland was around. The family reached out to a Catholic priest to have an exorcism conducted, during which Roland slashed the priest's arm open with a bed spring that he had ripped out, laughing in enjoyment at the sight of the priest's injuries. A second unsuccessful exorcism observed a shaking bed, flying objects, Roland speaking in a demonic voice, and Roland's aversion to anything sacred or blessed. In a third attempt, Roland's body became covered in strange markings, his mattress began to shake, and he actually broke the nose of one of the priests. Now, after roughly 30 attempts, a final exorcism was said to have finally worked, and Roland went on to live a seemingly normal life afterward. Really, how can someone live normally after that? All right, our next case is the Smurls poltergeist. The Smurl family claimed it was not a person, but in fact their entire home that had been taken over by a poltergeist. Paranormal investigators and demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren claimed the house was occupied by a very powerful demon, performing several failed exorcisms on the home. The demon's alleged attacks on the family included loud banging, foul-smelling odors, shaking mattresses, physical assaults such as being pushed down the stairs and even touched inappropriately, as well as the dog being thrown into a wall. Now, in 1986, after publishing a book about their experiences, the family claimed intense prayer had helped return things to normal. Although, I don't know about you, but that seems like a pretty suspicious timeline for the haunting to suddenly stop. Okay, and up at number 2, we have the case of Anneliese Michel. Perhaps one of the most terrifying exorcism cases in history, Anneliese Michel's story went on to inspire the 2005 film, The Exorcism of Emily Rose. Michel, a young German woman, had struggled from an early age with mental illness. Diagnosed with epileptic psychosis, she also experienced depression and visual and auditory hallucinations, for which she was hospitalized. Now, with time, her symptoms intensified, growing to include an aversion toward religious iconography. Both she and her Catholic family attributed her condition to demonic possession, and beginning at the age of 22, she underwent an intense 10 months of Catholic exorcism rites. Nearly 70 exorcisms were performed on her in secrecy under the order of the church, ultimately and unfortunately leading to her passing. All right, and up at number 1 in today's video, we have the case of Gottlieben Dietz. In 1842, German villagers noticed strange happenings at the home of a 28-year-old woman named Gottlieben Dietz. Dietz claimed her house was haunted and soon began slipping in and out of trance-like states, but it was only when a religious pastor commenced an exorcism that things truly went wrong. Dietz became violent, requiring physical restraints for 2 torturous years, during which the pastor performed various exorcism rites. Dietz apparently vomited glass, nails, and blood. Finally, it was determined that Dietz's demons were gone, and she claimed that Jesus is victor in her battle. All right, starting off at number 10, we have unexplained temperature drops. One of the easiest ways to tell whether demons or jinn are present in your home is by paying attention to the temperature. If you experience unpredictable shifts in temperature, this could mean that you are indeed in the presence of an otherworldly entity. The reason for this is pretty straightforward. Supernatural entities require energy, and when they are present, they pull energy from the environment. Accordingly, their presence is directly associated with sudden drops of temperature. All right, the next thing to look out for are electrical glitches. Electrical glitches can include anything from ringing phones with no one on the other end of the line to flicking lights, televisions that turn off and on, and more. Problems with electricity is a classic clue that reveals a supernatural presence could be nearby. Supernatural entities exist within another dimension and need conduits to make contact, which is why audio and video recording devices have become so well known as methods of communicating with spirits. Now, this next one is interesting. You might want to keep an eye out for unexplained smells. One of the most common ways to identify the presence of a demon, spirit, or jinn is through the sudden appearance and disappearance of a specific scent. Supernatural smells will usually be somewhat familiar, like perfume, flowers, or the distinctive aroma of pipe tobacco, for example. Sometimes the scents can also be unpleasant, like that of sulfur, which has been connected to negative hauntings. These smells can manifest and then suddenly disappear without any explanation. Coming up at number 7, we have unusual feelings of depression and sadness. Now, it's quite unusual to have feelings of overwhelming sadness and depression in your home. It may not always be connected to your mental health. There may be an outside influence, especially when the feelings tend to disappear as soon as you leave your house. In many cases of negative and oppressive hauntings, homeowners are plagued by heavy feelings of sadness, anger, fear, and or depression, which cannot be easily explained. This may be a clear sign that something is sharing your home with you. Moving on to the next sign, which is the movement of objects. If you start seeing things like doors, cupboards, and drawers opening and closing by themselves, or maybe you notice that things seem to disappear from one part of the house only to show up in another spot without having been moved by anyone else who lives in your home, you may be in the presence of a supernatural entity. Keep in mind that a supernatural being needs to build up quite a lot of energy to interact with physical objects. So if this is happening, it's worth looking into further. Coming in at the halfway point at number 5, we have unidentifiable sounds. The unexplainable clomping sounds of boots on the staircase, footsteps going up and down hallways, knockings in the walls or on doors, and disembodied voices in the night are all signs that your house could be haunted. While strange sounds are often more closely connected to residual hauntings, it is also possible that you have a demon or jinn on your hands who wants to get your attention. Now, this next one is interesting. I've actually experienced it myself. Odd behavior from your pets. If your pet begins spending an inordinate amount of time in a certain area of your home, or having a sudden reaction to something that is unseen by you, then it is very possible that they are making contact or sensing the energies of a paranormal entity. Animals can pick up on sounds, smells, and sights that are not detectable to humans. In addition, dogs especially are known to foresee imminent earthquakes, tornadoes, and other natural phenomena. So it is not a surprise that your pet can also feel and react to the presence of ghosts, demons, or jinns. Up next, we have the feelings of a nearby presence. Many people who find themselves living in a haunted house will often speak of a feeling of a presence in the house that they just can't explain. This may manifest as a feeling of someone standing over your shoulder, close behind you, or even in the room with you, when you can clearly see that no one else is there. It is sometimes felt like there is an unexplained pressure on your body, such as your shoulders or legs. It is also possible to feel as though you are being watched wherever you go in the house. Experiences such as these could be a sign that a supernatural entity is trying to observe and make contact with you. All right, and our next one is the sensation of being touched. This one is creepy to me. Supernatural entities also try to get your attention through touch. Perhaps a tug on your hair, a touch on your shoulder, gentle tugging on your clothes, or in more negative situations, pushing someone down the staircase, scratches, bruises, burns, or worse. If this is something that you start to experience in your home, it is very possible that you have an unwanted presence there. And coming in at number 1, we have seeing shadows and movement. If you suddenly start seeing the sudden apparition of what looks like a person or some type of demonic figure standing in a corner or anywhere in your home really that vanishes inexplicably, it is highly likely that you have a supernatural situation on your hands. Most sightings will be much more subtle though. You may start to see flickers of movement out of the corner of your eye, but when you look straight at the spot, nothing is there. You might also see shadows that do not belong, moving in the opposite direction of the light, or seeming to float around in the darkness. If this becomes a common occurrence, you may have a supernatural ghost, demon, or jinn in the house with you.
Right, so let's start off with number 10. Here we have personality disorders. So when a person has changing personality disorders all the times, and if these episodes are very, very sudden, this could be a sign. However, there are several medical disorders that affect a person's mental state, but this definitely is a sign that somebody would be possessed by a jinn. Now, number 9, not just their mental state changing, but also their facial structure actually physically changing. When a person is possessed by a jinn, you can really see that their facial features will change. They'll start twisting and contorting in different ways, so much that the person is not necessarily recognizable and may look like a completely different person at times. Now, moving on to number 8, their voice changing. So people's voices changing, maybe a man could start sounding more like a female or a child, or a woman could start sounding like a man, or sometimes people even growl like beasts, but you'll hear a change in their voice, like a drastic change, and that is a sign of jinn possession. Now, moving on to number 7, there's sudden displays of various different emotions. Now, a possessed person will suddenly start to laugh or cry or just get really angry and upset. And this can happen at some of the most inappropriate times, like laughing at a funeral or getting angry at somebody that just smiled at them. Really, the display of emotion will just happen at times where you can't justify that sort of behavior. So if you see that happening, or if you experience that yourself, could be jinn possession. Moving on to number 6, here we look at sensations in the body. Now, let me break it down for you a little bit. The person that's possessed would complain about sensations that are felt all over the body, like ants crawling up and down the insides of their body or outsides of their body, the temperature of their body increasing, they feel like they're burning up, sometimes they feel really cold, feeling like there's something in their stomach moving around. Also, sometimes you might find that they're able to just speak completely different languages without learning those languages. Now, number 5, halfway in, we look at nightmares. Okay, so a person who is supposedly possessed by a jinn, they're going to experience a lot of horrifying nightmares. And oftentimes these nightmares are completely repetitive. They can also hallucinate and sleepwalk, and those are just some symptoms of jinn possession. Now, next up, we have sleep paralysis at number 4. These people will experience sleep paralysis and feel like actually something is holding them down. They may feel like their throat is being gripped or their mouth is being bound, or sometimes they may feel a physical heavy weight on their chest and they try to move while they sleep, but they just can't. Or at times, sleep paralysis can stop them from screaming for help. But yeah, it's definitely a telltale sign that they are possessed by jinn. Now, number 3 brings us to a person becoming unhygienic and isolated. The person who always maintained a standard of hygiene and is always clean and well groomed, and then all of a sudden they just switch up. Yeah, that could be a sign of jinn possession. Also, you'll find people who are possessed by jinns, they like to stay in places of filth and be completely isolated, and he or she may start to like dirty surroundings. Yeah. All right, moving on to number 2, a big increase in physical strength. Now, this is a big one here. The person who is possessed may have superhuman strength when they are under jinn possession. They can lift up things, very heavy things like cars, and the objects that they lift up are generally a lot heavier than one person alone can actually lift up. And it's said that in some cases, when people are lifting up these heavy objects, they often don't even remember that they did that once the spell of possession breaks. And finally, at number 1, we have depression and hopelessness. Now, the jinn, the evil ones, their aim, according to Islam, is to attack a Muslim's belief system and fill them with hopelessness and depression and start letting them do haram, forbidden things that go against their religion. And this can come as a great wave and happen repeatedly over a period of time. Now, a Muslim is advised to fully put their faith in God, but when a person's at their lowest point, that's when the jinn really push depression and hopelessness and extreme sadness, which we know definitely can lead to other unfortunate outcomes. Starting with number 10, we have regional possession. This is a type of possession that can be very alarming and scary. It occurs as a seizure in your sleep when you can't really move or speak, and it happens so quick that it could be just seconds or minutes. And in most cases, if not at all, the jinn does this from the outside. Usually it's a flying type of jinn. Yeah, very scary. Now, moving on to number 9, we have projectory possession. This is a type of possession that a jinn takes possession of a person for a specific time period. It could be for hours during the day or night, then leaves the body and comes back the next day or the next week or the next month or the next year. And in some very rare cases, it doesn't come back at all. And the jinn, when it leaves the body, it can feel like a sensation similar to a sudden shaking or shivering in the legs, or it can feel like a big burst of air leaving your mouth. The possession type of number 8 is accompanying possession. The jinn permanently takes possession of one part of the body, like the leg, even the uterus or the spine of a person, or it can take possession of the entire body, day and night, whether you're sleeping or awake. It's almost like it becomes a part of your physical body completely. Number 7 brings us external possession. Now, external possession is a type of jinn possession where the jinn accompanies a person full-time or part-time. Now, the jinn has the ability to take the form of another human being or animal that can physically touch a person. Or the jinn can do things like sit on a person's back or press down on their chest. They also even whisper into a person's ear. Now, as mentioned, they do take on the form of animals, but this also goes to insects. They can take on those forms. They can become flies as well. And this one is particularly scary because in some cases, the jinns can bruise you or rip your clothing through external possession. The jinn can also take the form of a beautiful woman or a man to have intimate relations with their target. Moving on now to number 6, this is transistus possession. This is a type of a possession where more than one person is haunted simultaneously by a jinn. And usually it happens to people who have close relationships to each other. This is why it's called transistus, meaning to pass over or crossing through. And it could be one or more jinn that can haunt a group or family or team of some sort in this type of possession. Moving on now to number 5, we have imaginary possession. Yeah, this is a type of delusion, and it's said to be the most common type of jinn possession, surprisingly. Like, for instance, imaginary epilepsy is a thing which is a result of interacting with those who are actually possessed, then starting to imagine that you yourself have those same exact symptoms, or maybe an exorcist or spiritual healer suggests to you that you are afflicted by a jinn. And it all starts with an idea, then it becomes a belief that you're possessed, and then you start acting as if you're possessed. Now, the next type of possession at number 4, false pretense, it's actually similar to imaginary possession that I just mentioned, but this time the person is conscious of what they're doing. Some people who do this, they go back and forth to their spiritual healers or exorcists with their own agenda in mind. They have their own goals. They continue to attend healing sessions, and they scream and they shout and they say that they're here for whatever reason. They're experiencing this, and really they're actually not possessed or afflicted by a jinn in any way at all. All of this is to seek attention from others or to have an excuse for their bad behavior. So yeah, that one is not really a type of possession, but you get what I mean. Now, number 3 is the presence of waswasa. Now, this means suggestions and whispering, and it is an overwhelming form of possession that is very stressful for a person. The jinn haunts a person, making them cry and laugh and become really, really angry without any explanation, and this happens at random times. This type of possession of the jinn could last for hours or days or for the whole lifespan of a person, and this causes severe anxiety and can even cause obsessive compulsive disorder or OCD. So possession type at number 2 is brain influence. The jinn uses a person's brain to control the human senses, to control the nervous system, control the muscles. So yeah, this one is strictly to do with the brain and how the brain operates. But the possession type at number 1, also pretty similar to brain influence. Well, we have mind influence. And this is a type of possession that the jinn doesn't actually possess the physical body or the nervous system or the brain or anything like that. This is strictly mental. So images can flash in a person's mind, or scenes of chilling events can be seen as if they are watching a movie. But nothing physical actually happens. It's just up in the mind. So yeah, it makes you wonder when all those people in your life have said that, hey, they've heard voices, maybe they've seen something, and you may have labeled it as them going crazy, but yeah, they could have been possessed by a jinn.